The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Hi there. Regular viewers of this program may be wondering, what's Paikin doing up in his attic again? I thought the Agenda was back in Midtown Toronto in the studio. Well, last Thursday night I started to feel fluish, so I went for a PCR test and surprise, surprise, I've got COVID-19. Thankfully, I am double vaxxed, and so the symptoms have not been too difficult to deal with. And so here we are back up in the attic because, as they say, the show must go on. This is a great reminder of the importance of getting vaccinated, which I encourage everyone to do, so that if you get COVID, you may get the flu like I've got right now, but you won't get much more serious consequences that too many others are experiencing in ICUs right now. With that, on to tonight's program. Ontario's unemployment rate stood at 7.6% last month, yet employers say they're finding it difficult to find workers. Tonight, do we have a labor shortage? We'll examine that. Then we'll speak to two climate scientists about why they're cautiously optimistic about the potential to do something about the climate crisis. It's Monday, September 20th, and that's ahead on the agenda. Imagine being poised to reopen or ramp up after months of lockdowns, only to be short one essential part of your business: workers. It's not an uncommon story, and with us for their experience, we're joined in the nation's capital by Lindsay Osborne. She is marketing manager at Ridge Rock Brewing Company, and in Little Italy of the provincial capital, Rebecca Sutherland. She is the salon owner and colorist at Hair Artisans. And it's great to have both of you on TVO tonight.
Thank you.
I wonder if I could just get the two of you. Lindsay, let's start with you. Just tell me about your business.
Yeah, so I work for Ridge Rock Brewing Company. We're out in Carp, Ontario. It's at half an hour from Ottawa's port. We've been open 3 weeks this weekend, actually. So it's great. The community really supports us a lot, but unfortunately, we're not open 7 days a week anymore fully. We are now open 5 days a week because we simply can't find staff to work in the kitchen, and it's very
I'm going to follow up on that in a second. Yeah, Rebecca, how about your business? Where is it? How long you been open? How long you been there? All that stuff.
We've been open for actually 10 years this year. August was our 10-year anniversary. We're at Yonge and St. Clair in Toronto. And we also used to be open 7 days a week, and we're down to 6 days a week, and we're short-staffed 4 of those days.
Well, let's follow up on that since you've both mentioned it right away. Lindsay, when you say you're short-staffed or having trouble getting people, be specific. What do you mean?
Yeah, so I would say normally we have roughly 20 kitchen employees, whether it be full-time and part-time. Right now, we're down to basically a quarter of that. It's crazy. Basically, 2 days a week now, we have our brewery staff volunteering to help out and barbecue just so we can actually keep food going out to the guests. A lot of our staff went back to college and university, but aside from that, like, we just can't. There's nobody applying. It's like that at every restaurant, I feel like, across the province. It's insane.
And Rebecca, how about in your world?
Similar, like in 2019, we employed anywhere from 7 to 9 people, and we currently employ 3 people. We lost people during the pandemic a variety of ways, and now that we're looking to rehire, we're having a hard time finding people, especially experienced and more senior stylists. We're starting to see some people for the junior positions. The schools are starting to graduate apprentices and new hairdressers. So we're seeing a little bit of interest that way, but it's been really difficult.
Rebecca, where do you think they have gone?
I think there's a few different places. I know that people have left the industry entirely, gone back to school, pursued other creative pursuits. I think there is an underground industry for hairdressers right now that people are working, going to people's homes or working from their own home. And yeah, I think when you're locked out of work for so long, you look for something that's going to be a little more secure.
Lindsay, how about in your world? Where do you think the workers have gone?
Yeah, I agree with Rebecca. I think that because of all the lockdowns, people were forced to leave the industry because they had to find something that was stable. They're just worried about when the next lockdown is going to be, when there's restricted, amounts of people that we can have in the restaurant and stuff, and we're forced to lay people off or give them less shifts. Like, they still need to pay their bills, right? So they've been going to different industries, and even, you know, offering to pay them more and stuff. That's not really the issue. It's just they've gone to different industries entirely.
And Lindsay, have you tried, for example, I don't know what, like offering a few bucks more an hour, raising the potential wages they could earn if they were to come back? You have done that.
Absolutely, yeah. We've raised the wages. Our ownership group has agreed to like match the tip out that we normally do anyways. We're out of the country kind of, so you can't take public transit here. So we've even toyed with the idea of paying for people's Ubers back and forth just to get them out here, like literally anything. We've basically exhausted every regular avenue. So,
Rebecca, how about you? Have you tried wage increases?
We have, yeah. We've increased the hourly like base pay for our staff. We've added paid sick days that weren't something that we used to do before that were typical in our industry. And I guess those are the two main things that we've done to try and encourage people and make us look more desirable. But we know that all the salons in the city are looking for staff. So it's also, there's a lot of places looking.
Well, can I ask you a bit of a tricky question here, Rebecca, and you won't get mad at me?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted the green light first before I was going to do it.
Yeah.
Do you think that maybe some of the people who once worked for you are out there in the underground economy, working under the table, doing it secretly or surreptitiously? They're still in the business. They're just not doing it with you anymore.
I think that's happening. Amongst my staff that I lost, I know where most people have gone, and that's not the case with people that I've lost. But I do think there are people out there who are earning a living doing hair from their home, and it's underground. It's not going to be reported back to the CRA.
Lindsay, how about you? Is there a similar kind of experience that could be happening in your line of work?
Honestly, here, I don't think so. I think they've really changed industries or gone to school for them or into business for themselves. I think we used to have a lot of younger staff too. And I think that those staff are just, you know, not working right now and supporting themselves other ways. So,
Lindsay, let me share another thing that I've occasionally heard from people, and that is the jobs they used to do were jobs they did because they needed a paycheck. They didn't necessarily do it because they loved it. And once the pandemic came and showed them how difficult or fragile life could be, they just weren't about to risk their health or anything else for what was, in their view, not a significant enough paycheck anyway. You think there's anything to that?
Yeah, that's fair. I think that some people, like the people that are still in the industry, are in the industry because they're passionate about what they do. You know, they love cooking, they love serving guests, they love making people happy. And so those are the people that have remained. For those that were just there for a paycheck, just like any industry, it's obviously understandable. I think there was a lot of challenges in the restaurant industry before in terms of like paid sick days or pay and things like that. And so the pandemic has really shifted that a little bit because there's a lot more benefit to working in the restaurants. But if it was just a job to you and you don't care about doing it, then obviously it makes sense that those people are gone anyways.
Rebecca, how about for you? Do you think that phenomenon has captured your industry as well?
I think it in some segments of our industry, that's probably true. But I think there's a lot of people that are creative, artistic personality types. And when they weren't able to do that legit, go to work for 9 months, they found ways to do it, especially because in our industry, we know that the salons were safe. When we reopened after the first lockdown, there wasn't COVID spread happening in salons. So when we were locked down again, that's when I think people went underground because they knew they could do their job safely, taking the proper precautions. And they wanted to continue to make people happy and share those relationships that we build with people and pursue their creative, artistic side doing hair.
Gotcha. I think I've got one more question for you, Rebecca, before our time's up. And that is, now, admittedly, I'm not exactly at my best right now. But, I mean, look at my hair. Can you do anything with it? What do you think?
I think your hair looks fantastic, Steve. They're taking very good care of you.
Now, are you lying to me? You should never lie to a guy who's suffering from COVID, okay?
No, I think your hair looks great.
Well, whether you mean it or whether you don't,
color?
I'm taking it.
I could paint some rainbows in there.
No. I'm good. I'm probably the only guy in television who's not coloring his hair, so we're going to keep it that way. It's really good of both of you to join us tonight here on TVO and lay out what the challenges are in both of your industries tonight. So take good care. Lots of luck going forward and stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, with that in place, let's get a wider sense of what's going on and why. And to do that, we welcome in Stratford, Ontario, Kaylee Thiessen, economist and policy analyst working in the research department at the labor union Unifor, and in Burlington, Ontario, Craig Alexander, President, Chief Economist, and Executive Advisor at Deloitte Canada. And as I welcome you two to the program, what stands out, Kaylee, among what you just heard? That's obviously a look on the ground. You see the bigger macro picture. What can you add to that?
The one thing that really stands out to me right away is just how much they talked about the uncertainty of whether or not people have transitioned to new industries or what they're doing instead. I think a lot of people have found a way to create employment and income for themselves in places where they weren't looking for it before or didn't know that they could find it. And that's one piece of this puzzle. One thing that I was really curious about, and I'd love to interrogate a little bit more, is when we're talking about job quality, what are the things that are on offer? There was an article recently from the CBC, and it was on Pizzeria Libretto that just talked directly about improving employment quality for their employers or employees and actually being able to find the workers that they needed. So in an industry like hospitality with such a high vacancy rate, that's something that seems like it would work pretty well and shows anecdotally at least that it has so far. Interesting. Craig, how about you? What stood out?
Well, I think it really summarizes how the hard-hit industries are being affected, and it really highlights how the health risks and the risk that jobs are more precarious. In other words, worries that the health risk is still out there. The employees are putting themselves at risk, but at the same time, they're also concerned that the job will go away again if there's new government restrictions. The one thing I'd flag though is I think that many people appreciate the challenges that hair salons and restaurants and other hard-hit industries, like hotels, et cetera, are experiencing labor shortages. But I would actually argue that those labor shortages are far more broad, that in point of fact, across the entire economy, many sectors, if not most sectors, are experiencing some labor shortages at the moment for a variety of different reasons.
Kaylee, do you want to follow up on your first answer? You think there may be something deeper, more systemic at play here?
Yes. I guess what I've been watching for is wondering how transitions will happen and what will transition over time in the economy as consumer demand has changed. We're looking more to people buying online versus going to stores and ordering food online versus going into a restaurant. How will that settle out in the long term is something we don't know yet, but we will know eventually. And then in terms of just thinking through broader labor shortages, I think that's something that was happening long before the pandemic hit. This is certainly not a new topic. And we've heard, in the skilled trades industry, in many other industries, people talking about the need for highly skilled workers or semi-skilled workers. And in fact, we have tons of solutions for that. I know we're going to get to that later, but it's certainly not a new conversation. It's just something that maybe has heightened since the pandemic happened.
Yeah, Craig, let me put a couple of numbers to you and get your take on this, because now let's go back pre-pandemic. January 2020, the unemployment rate in the province of Ontario was 5.2%. Pretty good number. In August 2021, last month, it was 7.6%. 5.2 versus 7.6. How unusual is it in an economy to have a high unemployment rate and a worker shortage at the same time?
The unemployment rate shows you that there is slack in the labor market, that there's people who are looking for jobs but can't find them. And at the same time, we have statistics from StatsCan that shows that in June, there was 815,000 vacant jobs. So we have people without jobs and we have jobs without people. And that tells you that there's a mismatch happening in the labor market. And I think some of it is captured by the interview that we had, like people going back to school who are retraining for retraining. They're going back to get some additional skills development. That's a positive thing. Now they won't actually count as unemployed if they aren't looking for work, but if they're currently upskilling, trying to get into a new area, a new industry, and they're looking and they haven't been able to get in, well, then they would be counted as unemployed. So it's very clear that that some industries are under enormous pressure in terms of trying to find workers, but they can't find the workers that they need. And simultaneously, there are people who are looking for jobs that can't seem to find them. The other thing that has been commented on, as you know, so there's some speculation about, is that the increased generosity of the employment insurance benefits could be having people who are, you know, they're reporting that they're looking for work, but they're not actually taking jobs because they can get those expanded EI benefits. And so there could be a government, you know, there could be a disincentive to work from the current government programs, but that's going to change after September 25. So on the 25th, I think the EI eligibility will drop, and some of that factor will diminish.
Well, you've nicely gone to where I wanted to follow up, and that is, yes, Kaylee, I'm sure you've heard it, everybody's heard it, that lots of people have simply decided, because of the generosity of unemployment benefits during the pandemic, that they're just going to sit it out for a little while. How much of that do you think is going on?
I think that the changes to the unemployment benefits, as well as the CRB and earlier on the CERB, give workers a lot more control over deciding what sort of job they want to take. And that's something that employers should be thinking about as we move into sort of continuing pandemic and eventually, hopefully, an end, is people want something better for their lives, and that includes higher pay, that includes better scheduling, more fair scheduling, that might include flexibility, it might include more hours at one job. All of those decisions probably depend on what industry an employer and a worker are operating in, but we have all learned that having a little bit less chaos in our lives is desirable. And if you were in a job where you had a lot more chaos in your life through the pandemic, then you have a better idea of what solutions are necessary in order to have a higher quality of life and work-life balance or something along those lines. And so I hope that we'll actually see job quality improve and people and workers demanding better from their employers over time.
Well, okay, but Kaylee, here comes my high, tight fastball follow-up pitch. Here goes.
All right.
What you've just said is all very lovely. The question is, should we have gone $350 billion into deficit this past year alone just so that people can have nicer work-life balance, but eventually passing the expenses of that nicer work-life balance onto their children and grandchildren in future higher taxes and deficit payments?
Yes. I think I just hit that right out of the park, right? Yeah, I think that we should. I mean, if the government had not done what it did over the last 2 years, we would have likely seen a further crash in the economy, more unemployment, people being unable to pay their bills, unable to buy food, and that would actually have caused a sort of vicious cycle in the economy, and we prevented that. Could it have been better? Yes. Are there things that we need to fix? Yes. But in fact, we could be building a better economy where more people are included in prosperity and more people have the opportunity to thrive. I hope we don't go back to what we had before. Many people were left out, and many people did not have the jobs that they were qualified for, did not have the jobs that allowed them to pay their bills, send their kids to school, participate in sports, have a lovely, safe home life. And those are all things that we should desire in a prosperous economy like Canada. And it's something that we can achieve. And now we've learned that that we can work harder to get there.
I do hear you, and I will. I guess I should follow up with Craig on this. And I'm not arguing, and I don't think I've heard anybody argue that we shouldn't have brought in the CERB and done all of those things to protect people during the worst ravages of this pandemic. But having said that, these programs can't last forever. They're not going to last forever. The economy is coming back. People are returning to work. Are you concerned we are at the point yet where we're paying people to stay home instead of get out there and start looking for work again?
Well, I think we are going to see a gradual winding down of the government support programs. And I think that, to the extent that the generous income support has been distorting labor supply, particularly at the sort of workers working close to minimum wage or slightly above minimum wage. I think that effect is going to disappear as the programs are wound down. I think we need to be a little careful about how we do sort of armchair quarterbacking, looking back during the crisis and then saying, like, was it the right thing to do? I mean, obviously, if the government's going to shut down the economy to deal with health risk, you actually have to provide support to workers and businesses so that they can do what the government has directed. I think that looking back on the data, you can see that the unemployment rate went up to just under 14%, which is a massive massive labor market shock, but personal income actually increased. In other words, the government transfers to Canadians exceeded the loss of labor income. So was it too generous? Maybe, but I'd be careful to be too critical because we were in the midst of a crisis and it was hard to know what was the perfectly optimal thing to do. And so if you're going to hedge your bet on one side, I think you hedged it in terms of being, too generous, but then you have to take it back. And as now that we've seen the pace of employment rebound, as we've seen the unemployment rate coming down, I do think the government's going to need to wind down those programs. But the one thing I would also highlight is I think the employment insurance system that we had pre-COVID was actually archaic and wasn't actually providing the support that workers needed. That people who work part-time are self-employed, gig workers often aren't eligible for EI. And so the employment insurance system needed to be reformed. And my hope would be, as we wind down these programs to something that has less of a disincentive to work, we also put in place, a much stronger income support framework in Canada.
Kaylee, does this crisis offer an opportunity to fix that?
Yes, it absolutely does. We've been talking about the sort of inadequacies of the unemployment insurance system for a long time. And we've seen that it's possible to fix that. And we know that even when we're not in a mass economic crisis, when someone loses their job, they are in an individual crisis. And we need to make sure that those systems protect people from a longer than necessary individual crisis in income so that they can go back to school, so that they can continue to pay their rent, feed their families, keep their home, all those things that are necessary to avoid further crisis over time. And that's something that we absolutely have to do. And we do see so many workers who were unable to qualify for EI before, and now they're able to, and that's something that has to continue, absolutely.
Well, Craig, let's follow up on that because, of course, we started our discussion hearing from somebody who worked in the hospitality business in Eastern Ontario, somebody who worked in the hair care business in Midtown Toronto, and we heard about what their experiences were all about. I do wonder how widespread that phenomenon is. I wonder, Craig, whether, I don't know, can you give us a handful of other sectors where people without jobs without people is still a big problem?
Well, I think it's quite broad. So the industries that were hit the hardest were, areas like retail, accommodation, tourism, travel, transportation, personal services like hairstylists. I mean, these are sectors that were very hard hit because they were deemed to be non-essential businesses, and so they were the most affected by the repeated government shutdowns and the restrictions. I think that the reason we have labor shortages in those areas was very well articulated. I think that there's continuing health risks, and that's deterring participation. I think that there's been people that are worried that if they go back to that sector, you're going to run into a problem that there could be another government restriction that impacts their employment adversely. I think that there have been workers that have taken the opportunity to go back to school to get new skills, and I think actually it could create labor shortages for some sectors, but workers pursuing a new passion and getting increased skills, that's actually probably what we need to see in the economy. But then there's the sectors that also have done very well during the downturn, like financial services and the expansion in demand in healthcare and pharmaceuticals and professional services. And in those industries, you're actually finding that there are labor shortages as well, even though they don't have the health risks and some of the concerns that those other sectors had. They're actually having difficulty finding the skilled workers that they need, because they've actually grown. Their employment has increased. Not only has it recovered from COVID, it's gone way beyond it. And I think one of the key things that's contributing to the pressure on many employers was the loss of immigration during the pandemic. Because if we look back pre-pandemic, between 80-90% of our labor force growth was actually coming from immigration, right? Because of aging population, what we're seeing is more of our population growth is coming from immigration. And then of course we basically lost immigration during the pandemic years, or during the pandemic. And so that too has created like an enormous strain. So, for example, I talked to one employer who is in the pharmaceutical sort of drugstore space, and they're having a lot of difficulty with recruiting general workers. And I think that many of the challenges they're having are like the interviews that started this discussion. But they're also having an issue because they often recruit and bring in pharmacists that are trained and educated abroad, and that inflow has suddenly disappeared. And so they can pay the existing pharmacists more, but ultimately there's a supply distortion that's been created by the loss of immigration. So I do think that this is a very broad issue. The one question is going to be, does it actually start to bid up, create wage pressures? I think workers getting paid more, workers, more inclusive growth is something we want to strive for. The one thing that's a challenge, though, is it could be inflationary, and that's something we need to be mindful of as well. Because if we get broad wage pressures, it could then lead to higher inflation, which could cause the Bank of Canada raise rates, and with all the debt that's been accumulated, that could be a problem.
Right, we don't want that. All right, in our last minute then, Kaylee.
But we do want wage growth.
Right, and I noticed Kaylee nodded her head when you said that, so that's somewhere where a chief economist, both for a corporation and for a union, agree. To that end, Kaylee, I wonder whether people watching this right now, and we have a minute left to go for you to answer this, whether people ought to just get more comfortable with the notion that in order to have in your judgment, better and fairer society, we should look forward to paying more for all sorts of stuff.
I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I think that right now we're seeing inflation is a little bit higher than we've seen in the past. That doesn't mean it's something that's going to stick around for the long term. These are short-term increases. When it comes to wage pressures on inflation, I think that we would have seen if robust wage growth was going to cause inflation, that would have been the case already before the pandemic. We were seeing robust wage growth and inflation was right at that target. So we don't need to be sort of fearful of that and creating fear that isn't warranted. And that, in fact, in order to get the inclusive economy that we want, that we've been talking about, that the Bank of Canada is talking about, the government of Canada is talking about, that the OECD is talking about, folks in Davos are talking about, we have to accept that we might need to wait a little bit longer before we increase the interest rate in order to make sure that everyone is experiencing the prosperity that's created by economic growth and not put the brakes on too soon. Then people get left out and we're back to where we were before.
And that's our time. Thanks to Kaylee Thiessen of Unifor, Craig Alexander of Deloitte Canada. It's been great having both of you on TVO tonight.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Okay, moving on. Essential workers kept us all going during the toughest times during this pandemic. Our Ontario Hub's field reporter, Jayan Jagannathan, wanted to capture what it felt like for them and what it feels like now that much of the spotlight on them has faded. Have a look at this. A frontline diary from grocery store clerk Josie Barberi.
Hi TVO, my name is Josie and I am a grocery store worker, and this is my life as an essential worker.
I think that we could have done a lot better in terms of how, like, I obviously saw it from a completely different lens because of where I was working, but that lens was a really crappy lens, and we just saw the worst of humanity from our angle, and we need to do better.
So I just finished my shift. It's been a horrible day. Honestly, just felt like I was gonna have a meltdown at least 5 times today. We've had 2 sick calls, and the reason that makes it more difficult is because they already cut our hours so much and have these high expectations of what we need to do in terms of like the job that we need to do, the the production, the service, and all that stuff. But yet they don't give us the staff to do that. So I'm gonna go home and maybe feel better with some dinner. My mom has some trouble getting around sometimes. She's waiting for hip surgery, which has been delayed because of COVID. So let's go say hello. Hi, Mommy.
Hi.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good. What are you making?
I'm making something like you.
When I was sick, my dad was so scared and concerned, and he like cried on the phone with me, and it was like the first time my dad's ever cried on the phone like with me, and it just like was so heartbreaking for me, like seeing my dad's like my parents feel so like helpless in the situation. I was terrified because I was really sick, and I was scared that I would be ventilated, and because I just heard all these awful like horror stories about it, and so I was scared, and so because of that, I took every precaution possible to get better. I had friends who were like herbalists and made me things. I did the breathing exercises religiously. I did not sleep on my back and constantly would get up and walk even though I had no energy and could barely move.
And one of my favorite forms of self-care is going for walks and hikes on trails. There's really nothing quite as peaceful as that, in my opinion. Just away from people. I had a long day today after work, and I took that walk. I came home and had dinner quickly, and I had school online, and class went until like 10 o'clock today, and it went actually over the time. And so it was a really long day today, and I'm really tired, and nothing else is gonna get done today. That was already way too much. So today was another busy day, and I worked all day, and then I had to jump onto a conference call that we had on Zoom with one of the Labor Council Women's Committee that I'm on. So because I'm always so busy, I don't really have time to cook and stuff, and this week's been a nightmare. I haven't gone grocery shopping, so it's sushi. That's what we're having for dinner tonight, is sushi. So today is an actual day off for me, and I'm doing some self-care by the lake. So me and my friend are gonna hang out. Hi! I literally, my mom used to tell me that Siegel's favorite food is French fries. She's never been. So we decided to get some snacks while we're at the beach, and we were joined by Steven Seagal over here. Hi, buddy.
You know, in the beginning of the pandemic, they gave us so many hours. And then they like immediately cut our pandemic pay and cut all our hours. So we have to struggle with bare minimum, if not even bare minimum employees. I'm already anticipating that it's going to be really not so fun time tomorrow. So wish me luck with that. Massimo, wish me luck. Wish me luck. Wish me luck.
All that nice, like, you know, thanks for being here, thanks to the frontline workers, like none of that exists anymore. So people are just like cranky and rude to us, and they're just over it. If there's one thing I can change is that we can create more of a connection with people, and people connecting with themselves, and in turn connecting with one another, so that, you know, knock on wood, in the event when we do go through these types of hardships, that we can get through it a little bit better than what we did.
Last month, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its most recent report, and it will surprise no one after this summer's fires and floods that it contains some tough news. But less noted was some cause for optimism. With us now for more, two of the climate scientists who contributed to the report. In Victoria, British Columbia, Greg Flato, Senior Research Scientist at Environment and Climate Change Canada and Vice President of the IPCC's Working Group 1. And in Atlanta, Georgia, Kim Cobb, professor in the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at the Georgia Institute of Technology and one of the lead authors of the IPCC's Working Group 1. And we're delighted to welcome both of you to TVO tonight. Greg, perhaps we could start by having you take us through what you think are the main findings of the report.
Okay, well, I think the main findings are that climate change that we have been experiencing is changing rapidly. It's changing in ways that are unprecedented in at least 2,000 years. That we know why the climate is changing. It's indisputable that human activities are causing the changes in average temperature, causing changes in extremes, both the intensity and frequency of various extreme events. And that it is the future pathways of emissions that will determine the extent of warming and the extent of changes that we will see going forward.
Kim, I've heard this question asked, and I'm sure you have heard it asked many times, but let's put it to you anyway. The Earth's temperature has varied before. What makes this time different?
Well, this definitely hits on my core expertise in paleoclimate, the study of climate of the past. And what makes these current periods so exceptional are three things. The global extent of the warming that we're seeing is unusual in the context of the last several millennia. The rates of warming are also relatively unusual. Remember that we know it took 10,000 years to warm from the last ice age, which was a 5 degrees Celsius change. And last but not least, we know the levels of current warming are also highly unusual. We have to go back, in fact, 120,000 years or more to the last interglacial period to see global temperatures warmer than they are today.
So, in fact, this time it's different.
It's different.
The report also highlights some pathways to manage some climate risks. Kim, do you want to take us just through some of the highlights of that?
Yeah, so very important to note that the IPCC Working Group 1 is policy relevant, but really not policy prescriptive. But having said that, some very actionable information contained in the report, and most notably a region by region breakdown of the kinds of climate impacts that are, of course, already upon us and will accelerate in coming decades, giving communities and policymakers really relevant information to chart a course for climate ready communities, as well as understand just the risks that are at stake right now with respect to emissions choices in the next decade or two. Number two, the important information contained in this report outlining warming levels across the century tied to specific emissions choices, and helping us understand that most ambitious target of 1.5 degrees Celsius still within reach if dramatic and sustained actions are taken this decade.
Well, I think that leads to the next thing that we want to talk about, which is the hopeful path that this report likes to put us on. And here's an excerpt from the report that I'll read now, which suggests that despite the precarious position the planet's in, it's not hopeless. Here we go. A reason for hope. Deliberate removal of carbon dioxide, CO2, from the atmosphere could reverse some aspects of climate change. However, this will only happen if deliberate removals are larger than emissions. Some climate change trends, such as the increase in global surface temperature, would start to reverse within a few years. Other aspects would take decades, for example, permafrost, thawing, or centuries, for example, the acidification of the deep ocean, to reverse, and some, such as sea level rise, would take centuries to millennia to change direction. Okay, so Greg, this has, obviously profound implications here, and Canada has said that it is committed to moving towards a net zero emission situation by the year 2050. Let's pick that apart. Net zero emissions means what exactly?
Well, net zero emissions means that we have stopped the forcing that is driving temperatures to increase. So if you think about the car analogy, if your foot is on the gas, the car is going to keep accelerating. The only way to get the car to stop accelerating is to take your foot off the gas, and if you want it to slow down, to put your foot on the brake. So temperatures will continue to rise as long as emissions of greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, continue to be put into the atmosphere, because carbon dioxide lasts for a very long time once it's placed in the atmosphere. So only by halting those emissions and getting to zero or net zero, which is the combination of emission reductions plus some removals to offset the difficult to mitigate emissions of things like methane from agriculture, then you get to a situation where you can stabilize temperature at some level.
Well, help us understand that a little better, because I think probably people can't imagine a situation where we're not emitting anything noxious into the atmosphere, but the flip side of somehow being able to mitigate that by doing other things. What are those other things that we can be doing?
Well, there are ways that carbon dioxide can be removed from the atmosphere. There are natural processes that take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and store it in land and in the ocean. And those processes continue to operate today as they did all the time in the past. The difficulty is that we're putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than those processes can keep up with, and so concentrations are rising in the atmosphere. So ways that we could reduce that are, first of all, to stop emitting in the first place, or reduce our emissions, to do things that would enhance the ability of the natural system to take carbon dioxide up, or to introduce technological means whereby we extract carbon dioxide from the effluent of fossil fuel-fired plants, for example, or directly capture it from the air and store it underground in geological formations, things like that. So there are a number of things that can be done, at least theoretically can be done, but at this point, those technological type of interventions are still really in the pilot phase.
Let me follow up with Kim Cobb on that, because Greg did say theoretically. So I wonder how close we are from moving from theoretically to actually being able to do that on a sustainable basis.
Tough question indeed. We may have seen the news this week of a new pilot facility for direct air capture of carbon dioxide opening in Iceland. This would be such a small fraction of the total CO2 that's in the sky to be virtually negligible, and it's quite costly as well. And so for now, again, as Greg was saying, the most important thing we need to do is to reduce the emissions, the input of these greenhouse gases into the sky in the first place. And second of all, most importantly, make sure that those natural sinks that have been working so hard for us over the last decades, basically saving us from 50% of the emissions that we've put up into the sky, coming back down into the land, into the atmosphere, into the ocean, are intact. and that they are healthy going forward. This includes the rainforests of the world, which unfortunately we're turning the knob in the wrong direction, moving to deforest so much of the rainforest that it's contributing 10 to 15% of the emissions that we are creating every single year. And so again, making sure that we keep those ecosystems intact to serve as natural sinks, just as important as thinking about emissions reductions, just as important as thinking about how quickly we can scale these very new and relatively expensive technologies to reverse some aspects of our emissions in coming decades.
And Kim, let me follow up with you again on the excerpt I read from your report just a moment ago. We suggested that if we did some good things, we could see some relatively quick signs of improvement. There are other things, however, that could take years or even centuries to improve upon. Okay, so the question is, how quickly might the warming of the planet stop if we were to move in relatively short order to do some of the things that the report suggests?
Well, it's really important that the public understand this. What we're fighting for is the ability to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by mid-century. That implies two things. We still have some increments of warming to come, and we know all of the impacts that come along with that thanks to the new science in the IPCC report. What we're doing in acting quickly towards achieving that kind of maximum of warming is frankly reserving the right to cool later this century. The trajectories of the most ambitious pathways in the new report do in fact show cooling throughout the latter part of the 20th century, something that we weren't certain we could achieve several years ago with the science. And so now we're able to say that that's a pathway we could walk if we so desire. But again, the next decade, critical choices about our emissions pathways that would either make that out of reach or, of course, make the warming levels higher by mid-century, together with all of those impacts along with it.
And can I get you to speak to one more thing, which is you can imagine the layperson saying 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. Well, that doesn't sound like very much. Doesn't sound like it would have much of an impact at all. Can you explain why it is actually extremely impactful?
Yes, I mean, I think people can understand where we are right now and the fact that we are currently reeling from so many climate-fueled natural disasters around the world that are gripping our headlines. With this new United Nations report, stronger physical links to drought in drought-prone regions like the Western United States and the Mediterranean, fire-prone weather in those areas piling on to create the kind of conditions that we see on the ground right now in the headlines, where people are losing lives, livelihoods, and landscapes that will be transformed for decades to come. So what we can do now is link these extremes to the current levels of warming. 1.1 degrees Celsius is where we are parked right now. And we're talking about adding an additional 0.4 degrees Celsius onto the warming levels that we are right now, and bringing that whole basket of climate change impacts up several more notches from where we are. So this is the problem. The climate system is very sensitive to these levels of global warming. And if we don't like where we are, we certainly don't want to see a doubling of warming to a 2 degrees sea level warming or more.
Understood. All right, Greg, I want you to take us back about 6 years when Canada, along with nearly 200 countries, signed the Paris Climate Agreement. And it committed us and all those other signatories to do various things to fight climate change. I wonder if you could tell us, in your judgment so far, how well we have done in living up to those commitments we made in the Paris Climate Agreement.
Well, the Paris Agreement was unique in the sense that it allows countries to set their own nationally determined contributions to reducing emissions and to halting climate change. So after the Paris Agreement, countries one after another rolled out their initial plans, their initial levels of ambition, as Canada did and most other countries did. But the important part of the Paris Agreement is that it has this mechanism to ramp up the level of ambition. There's something called the global stock take, which is every 5 years following the Paris Agreement, there is a stepping back and looking at how much we accomplished, what have we done, where are there still challenges, what more needs to be done, how could we do more? And that's really the key to the Paris Agreement, is this constant ratcheting up of ambition. And a number of countries, including Canada, have very recently announced additional efforts, additional targets, more stringent targets, more ambitious action to limit climate change. And that's exactly how the Paris Agreement is intended to work. But of course, it takes time for these announcements to be turned into action, and that action to ultimately be turned into emission reductions.
Now, I appreciate that, but how do I put this? I'm really not trying to get you mixed up in the current election campaign. I'm really not. But this issue has come up over and over again in the current election campaign. And so having you here, I want to do a little fact checking. It has been alleged that the current government has not met a single climate target agreed to in the Paris Climate Agreement. True or false?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not a policy person. I'm a science person, and the targets that have been announced are targets for years like 2030 and 2050, which of course are still in the future. And what the IPCC report and the previous special report on 1.5 degree warming showed very clearly is that in order to achieve the low levels of warming, like 1.5 or 2 degrees, we have to get emissions down to something like half of their level globally by 2030 and get to net zero by around 2050. So that's the trajectory that is required if we want to keep temperatures below 1.5 or 2 degrees, which is in fact the Paris Agreement target.
Okay, and Kim, I'll make the same admonition to you. I'm really not trying to get you mixed up in U.S. politics, but we well remember that the U.S. was in, and then the previous Republican administration took the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Where's the U.S. now?
Well, we are in. And obviously the current administration places a high priority on climate action and is moving through a discussion on the budget for the United States that would really chart a path towards very aggressive emissions reductions in the very near term over the next 15 years or so, if some of these aspects of our infrastructure bill pass. What is most notable as well is the administration's action to bolster the resilience of communities across America to harness this newly available science and make it actionable to keep communities safe as we continue to warm. Obviously, a lot on the line in the United States, a new role for climate action, something that I hope greatly as a scientist who has been working on this for decades, we come to see the kind of immediate sustained emissions reductions, because the early aggressive action is exactly what is required. That's what brings warming levels to a lower level. Later and less is not what is in the formula for keeping warming levels to a minimum this century.
No, I take your point, but as you look around the world, what do you see in terms of other countries which have signed the Paris Agreement in terms of their living up to the spirit and the letter of what they agreed to?
Well, I think, I'm not a policymaker as well, as Greg said, but, the disruption that COVID has brought into our lives is apparent in terms of some of the lessons it might hold going forward, especially as we approach these ratcheting up of ambitions in terms of what's truly possible. Many countries thinking about economic stimulus packages, infrastructure investments, job packages to boost their economies in a post-COVID world, and thinking about how to center the kinds of low carbon energy technologies and climate action into those bills is obviously critical, and COVID helping us understand just how quickly things can change even in the best laid plans, and that it's critically important to get going right now.
Here's a weird question for you, Greg. Is there a small part of you that appreciates, not the death, obviously, what COVID did to this world? We had clear skies in a lot of places that we never used to have clear skies in because so many people couldn't pollute in the way they used to. Is there a part of you that kind of appreciates that?
Well, it's hard to frame it as appreciation, but it is the case that the economic slowdown, the fact that the transportation sector was slowed down remarkably, from air transport to vehicle transport to truck transport, that industrial activity slowed down, especially in the early parts of the COVID pandemic. And that did lead directly to improved air quality in a number of places that consistently suffer from poor air quality. So it illustrated very clearly that action on emissions not only is helpful for reducing emissions that lead to warming, but lead to a reduction in emissions of air pollutants that are often co-emitted with these greenhouse gases, and that those lead to improvements in air quality and improvements in health. So from that perspective, it was yet again an indication that you can do something about it, and there is opportunity to improve not only the climate but the air that we breathe.
Okay, Kim, last minute to you. A big climate change conference coming up in Scotland in November. What would you like to see emerge from that?
Well, obviously, as a climate scientist who sees the writing on the wall quite clearly with respect to what's coming down the road and the level of emissions reductions that are required to meet our most ambitious targets globally, I hope to see action across the board. I hope to see a leading role for the United States as, of course, an American myself, but also looking to some of the other key players, China, Canada playing big roles, Australia stepping up and talking about what can be done, and thinking about also how we might be able to turn to support emerging economies where some of this deforestation is occurring, so that we recognize the critical role for preserving those natural sinks going forward.
Wonderful. I want to thank Kim Cobb and Greg Flato for joining us from Atlanta, Georgia and Victoria, British Columbia, respectively. Be well, you two, and see you down the road, I hope.
Thanks for having us.
And that is the agenda for Monday, September 20th, 2021. Polls are, of course, closing across the country, and so tomorrow we will analyze what happened in Canada's 44th general election. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism. Ontario Hubs are made possible by the Barry and Laurie Green Family Charitable Trust and Goldie Feldman.